generation has no future, and I refuse to believe that I have been given permission to live and I am free. I realize this may be a shock, but God has a purpose for my life is actually a lie. And I believe money and popularity are priorities. In my lifetime, I will tell the people closest to me, I have my priorities straight, and I must hold on to my pride. I surrender the idea that my actions will have an everlasting impact. In the future, lukewarm beliefs will be the norm. No longer can it be said that my peers and I care about our faith. It will be evident that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It is foolish to presume that there is hope. But what if we change that? What if we shatter those expectations? What if we flip the script? There is hope. It is foolish to presume that my generation is apathetic and lethargic. It will be evident that my peers and I care about our faith. No longer can it be said that lukewarm beliefs will be the norm. In the future, my actions will have an everlasting impact. I surrender the idea that I must hold on to my pride. I have my priorities straight, and in my lifetime, I will tell the people closest to me, money and popularity are priorities. It's actually a lie, and I believe God has a purpose for my life. I realize this may be a shock, but I have been given permission to live, and I am free. And I refuse to believe that my generation has no future.
Well, yeah, that's good stuff. And some of you are wondering back to the beginning of our service, and Chad promised a gift for those of you who won the little quiz, all right? And I just got to tell you a little something. Chad told me that he got a little nervous. He forgot to give you your gift because, I don't know if you know, but there's a TV monitor right here that is like counting down, and it tells you how much longer you have if you're on stage to finish what you're supposed to be doing. And he said that his time was over and it was blinking red, okay? And he thought that something was going to explode, and so he just had to rush off stage really quick. So if you won, go ahead and stick up your right hand like this. If you won the quiz, all right? And if you got second place, there's no losers today, but second place, go ahead and give them a nice big high five on the hand. Congratulations for winning that student ministry quiz. All right, good job. Well, my name is Brad. I'm the high school pastor here. I love Student Takeover. Kids Takeover last week was a lot of fun, wasn't it? And then, and I don't know if you've heard, but next week is Infant Takeover, all right? It's gonna be really exciting. I don't know what they have planned, but I'm thinking maybe the bulletins are gonna be real thick cardstock, like board books. We all get burp cloths when we come in. We're gonna get to communion time, and we're gonna be eating goldfish and apple juice. And the coffee cups in the atrium are gonna be replaced with spill-proof sippy cups. It's gonna be really exciting. Infant Takeover next week, all right? You could have a lot of fun with that. But we are in this series called The Divine Equation, Faith, Hope, and Love. And the Bible holds these three virtues up. And we've been saying, if you have Jesus Christ in your life, and you have these three virtues in your life, pretty much the rest of your faith begins to take care of itself. These are kind of like the biggies here. Now, do you know where these three are found together in the Bible? It's 1 Corinthians, I heard somebody say, 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, verse 13 says, now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is hope. I'm totally just messing around. It's because it's Hope Week this week, all right? It's not hope. The greatest of these is love. Hope is great, but it's not the greatest. And so, as we talk about hope today, wouldn't you say that there's two different kinds of hope, right? The first kind of hope is just a wishful thinking kind of hope. For example, you might say something like, I hope it doesn't rain this afternoon, which if you live in Nebraska in the spring of 2015, that hope is not gonna come true at all, right? Okay, it's gonna rain this afternoon. You might say something like, I hope she says yes when I ask her out on a date. I hope to get a raise at work this year. I hope to stay awake for Brad's entire sermon this morning. Hope. And unfortunately, wishful thinking hope is the kind of hope that most people in our culture have today. And it's just based on, I hope something happens, because if you don't have Jesus Christ in your life, that's really pretty much all the human strength that we can muster up is just some hope. A roll of the dice that it might happen. That's the first kind of hope. But the second kind of hope is a biblical kind of hope. And biblical hope is a strong and confident expectation. Biblical hope is trusting God for the future based on his faithfulness in the past. Hebrews 6:19 talks about this hope when it says, we have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. That's biblical hope. And so I wonder for you, when you say that you hope in something, is it just wishful thinking, or is it a deep, confident expectation anchored in Jesus Christ that something is going to happen? And hopefully, God is developing that deeper kind of hope in us as his followers today. And so, as I was thinking about it, there's opportunities that we have all the time to give up and to lose hope, or to speak hope into the situations in our life. And I was thinking of health conditions, whether it's small things or big things. We need hope when it comes to our health, right? As a pastor, I get to visit people in the hospital, and I get to speak hope into their lives, and I can really say it and mean it when I say, have hope for God's healing, because we have Jesus Christ. He's our healer. We need hope as we try to be the light and share Christ with the lost people around us, don't we? I was talking to somebody a couple weeks ago. She's been trying to be a light in her neighborhood and sharing Jesus and praying for her neighbors. And she's like, after years and years, I don't feel like anything is happening. I don't feel like there's any change in their lives at all. And I was able to look at her in the eye and say, have hope, because God is at work in your neighbors' lives. We need hope in our families too, right? I don't know that we've ever needed more hope in our families than right now in America. And I was talking to a mom just this past week, teenage child, who just continues to break the family rules. Things are getting worse before they're getting better, and she's worried about her child. She's worried about her family. And I was able to say to that mom, have hope, because we serve a powerful God. We need his hope in all different parts of our lives. And then we need his hope too, because there's a lot of hopelessness in our world, isn't there? There's a lot of fear in our world. What are some of the things that you're afraid of? Are you maybe afraid of roller coasters like this girl in this picture? All right, her dad's having a blast, or whoever that is. She's having a little bit of a rough go here. The next picture I have is a picture, it's in a haunted house, okay? And these people going through the house, they don't know that they're gonna take a picture of them, but they take like these hidden camera pictures. I hate haunted houses for this very reason, but right here, all right? Mom and daughter, scared to death, and dad is just laughing at them, okay? Love the dad, what he's doing there. But how much fear and worry do you have in your life related to more serious things? How much fear do you have related to ISIS, or to persecution, or to the future of our economy? How much fear and worry do you have related to your kids, or maybe your grandkids? I recently heard that this generation of parents is the first generation ever in the history of America that feels like their kids will be worse off than they are. And so there's this declining hope that things are going to keep getting better in our culture. How much fear do you have as it relates to your kids and your grandkids? What kind of fears do you have related to your own health, or to the healthcare system in America, or Social Security? Is it going to be there for you? How about just retirement in general? Are you going to have enough money for what you need to do during retirement? And I think in a room like this, a big fear that so many people have is a fear of our culture. As we look around, we don't see things getting better. We see things getting worse and worse. And maybe a fear that you have is that sin is literally eating our culture from within, and it's destroying it. And there's just no hope. What's going to happen to our great country that we live in? And maybe you feel like there's no hope at least. But I want to encourage you, because with God, in the midst of all these fears, there is great hope. One of the most hopeful times in the history of the Israelites is when they were on the verge of the promised land. They were getting ready to enter this land that God had promised them to have. And that's where we're going to pick up their story today in Deuteronomy chapter 31. You can follow on the screen. You can turn there in your Bibles if you want to. But here's the deal. We're going to do the student ministry style. And very often we like to keep it interactive with students. And part of our reasoning for doing that is just so that we don't just spoon feed them information, but we begin to teach them how to interact with the Bible and learn from the Bible, and even to teach others out of it. And so that's what we're going to have you do. And so listen as I read, look for places that you see hope in this passage. And then after I'm done reading, I'm going to give you like a minute or two to share with your neighbor and encourage them with the hope that you saw. So you'll say, hey, here's the verse number, and here's where I saw hope, kind of a thing, all right? Deuteronomy 31, verses 1 through 8. Then Moses went out and he spoke these words to all Israel. I'm now 120 years old and I'm no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. The Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He will destroy these nations before you, and you will take possession of their land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you, as the Lord said. And the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. The Lord will deliver them to you, and you must do to them all that I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. And then Moses summoned Joshua and said to him in the presence of all Israel, be strong and courageous, for you must go with these people into the land that the Lord swore to their ancestors to give them, and you must divide it among them as their inheritance. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you, and he will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. And so where did you see hope in there? Go ahead and encourage your neighbor, somebody around you, with the verse and whatever you saw in there about hope, all right? Go for it. All right, you found some good stuff in there. Hopefully you weren't talking to them about what you're doing for lunch today, all right? Staying on track. I'll just try to guess maybe a few places that you found hope. There's going to be more than we have time to talk about, but I'll just try to pick out a few of the high points. Did anybody say verse 2? Verse 2, and it goes like this, and maybe I'll read it and you'll say, okay, where's their hope in that? But check this out. Moses talking, he says, I'm now 120 years old, and I'm no longer able to lead you. The Lord has said to me, you shall not cross the Jordan. All right, yeah, that's a lot of hope in there, right? At first glance, maybe not. Where is the hope in there? Well, check this out. Even in Moses' sin, because it was his sin, his disobedience to God, that led to him not being able to go into the promised land, even in his sin, God still brings hope. Even in our sin, God still brings hope. Because what was happening here is that all along God wanted to pass the baton of leadership from Moses to the next generation, to pass it to Joshua. And so God said, Moses, you sinned, you messed up, that wasn't my plan, but I'm going to take that sin of yours and I'm going to use it for good, and I'm going to make that part of what I use to pass that baton of leadership on to that next generation. And so when you sin, when I sin, when we steer outside of God's plan for our lives, God's the kind of God who says there's still hope even in the worst things that you do, because I'm a God who even in your mistakes has a great and awesome plan, and a plan to bring hope. Even in our sin, God is able to bring hope. Maybe verse 4. Did anybody of you say verse 4 was the place that you saw hope in there? Check it out. And the Lord will do to them what he did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom he destroyed along with their land. All right, so Sihon and Og, they're leaders of these foreign nations. And by the way, if you're pregnant looking for a good boy name, Og is a great name for a son. Doesn't that just sound like a tough name, right? He'd probably like beat up all the kids at school. Og, no more, you know? It just sounds like cavemanish, I don't know. But anyway, all right. So these were bad nations. These were leaders of powerful countries. And if the geography helps you, here's a picture of the promised land here. And these are the lands that these two dudes and their nations occupied. And the Israelites, they've already, through God's power, been able to conquer them. Just for reference, here's the Sea of Galilee, here's the Jordan River, and the Chick-fil-A that they were trying to get to is over here, okay? The promised land over there, all right? And so up to half the promised land that God had said that they were going to get someday, he'd already given to them. And so there was great hope because his promises were already being fulfilled. And you think about your life and where you draw hope from, look at what God has already done in your life and draw hope for the future because of that. How about verse 6? Did anybody say, yeah, verse 6 was where I saw a ton of hope in there. Check this out. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Listen, this passage doesn't say that we're not going to have any trials. This passage doesn't say that you're not going to have reason to lose hope at times. You will have trials. You will have reason to lose hope. But check this out. When you're lacking hope, God is with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Wow, that's awesome hope. Another place that you might have found hope, verse 6 and 7. Maybe some of you said verse 6 and 7, and it goes like this. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or terrified because of them, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Then Moses summoned Joshua, be strong and courageous. It's repeated in there 2 different times. Be strong and courageous. Now, often we think of those words, be strong and courageous, and associate them with Joshua chapter 1, right? You might not have known that they were a couple chapters earlier here in Deuteronomy 31. Be strong and be courageous. If you have an internal hope that God is with you, that he will never leave you nor forsake you, then you can have these external actions and you can live your life in a way that's strong and courageous, no matter what you're facing. And maybe if you're here this morning and you're kind of living a wimpy, comfortable, safe Christian life, not doing anything strong and courageous for God, maybe it's because you don't have that internal hope that God is with you, that he'll never leave you nor forsake you. A result of having this hope is that you'll live a strong and courageous life, that God will use you, and that you won't live lukewarm Christianity. And then maybe there wasn't an exact verse attached to them, but a couple other places or ideas in here that I saw hope. One of them is just the idea that God has a mission for his people. In the Old Testament, one of their missions was to go in and conquer the promised land. That was their mission that God gave to them. And just like he gave them a mission, God has given us a mission. It's to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. And so whether that's in China or in Mali or across the street or with your friends or in your workplace, that's the mission that God has given you, to take the gospel to people who don't know him. And so to me, it's just super encouraging. It gives me so much hope that the God of the universe looks at me and chooses to use me to complete his mission, that he has hope in me that I'll do that. Wow, what that does to bolster my hope. And then maybe some of you are counting. Another thing that I gained hope from is the number of times that the name of the Lord is used in these verses. The name of Yahweh is in here 8 times. And so over and over again, it just points to the hope that we have, that it's in nothing or no one else except for God himself. He is the only true source of hope. We can't find hope in wishful thinking. We can't find it in our government. We can't find it in a coach of a team that we may or may not like. We can't find it in our job or our spouse or our family or our friends or our finances. The only true lasting hope is Jesus Christ himself. Anything else that we place our hope in is eventually going to let us down at some point. Probably the most famous verse in all of the Bible about hope is in Jeremiah 29:11, and it goes like this: "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." Because God, he is our source of help. And so what I want to do is I want to comb back through these verses one more time, because my goal is just to squeeze out of them all the hope that we can possibly get. Our goal for this morning is that you would walk away just filled with hope, kind of like a sponge, right? That God's hope would just fill you up and would permeate your life. And that as you face hopeless circumstances this week, that you can squeeze that hope out and you can apply it to those circumstances. And as you encounter people in your life that are maybe feeling a bit hopeless, you can squeeze that hope out and give that to them. And that you'd be a person who just continues to fill yourself up with hope, so that you can be a person who continues to give out that hope in your life. And so let's check out a few more things that I see in these verses of where we can get hope, things that the Israelites probably would have gained hope from. And one of the places they would have gained hope from is from the future leaders of their nation. They would have drawn hope from their future leaders, and I want to encourage you to do the same. You know, in the Israelite story, Moses, his time is coming to a close, right? He's 120 years old, And I hate to spoil the end of the story, but dude doesn't make it to 121, okay? His time is almost done. It's time to pass it on to Joshua because it's Joshua's time. Now, picture yourself in this scene back there with the Israelites. Moses is talking. The promised land is in the background. His hair is gently blowing in the wind. That just makes it more epic if his hair's blowing, I think. He's interrupted by someone's cell phone ringing. I'm sure that happened back then too. Are you filled with hope? As Moses brings up Joshua and he said, hey, I'm not going to go with you guys, but Joshua, you've seen him live out. You've seen his faith. Have hope in him and in his God because he's going to help you enter the promised land. Are you filled with hope as you're sitting there, hear this? Yes, I think you are. There's hope in the future leaders that the Israelites have. Now fast forward to 2015. Some of you have invested so much of yourselves into our country, into our community, into our church. And maybe as you look to the future of some of those things, you just are maybe discouraged at times. You wonder if there's any hope for things to change, to get better. You might be concerned. Culture doesn't seem to be getting any better, does it? It just seems to be getting worse. But here we are on Student Takeover. There's students all around the church, and I want to help you clearly connect the dots that God is at work in the future leaders of our church. These students are the current leaders, and they're going to be the future leaders. And they're going to be the people that God uses to impact our church and our community and our world. And it's just going to be awesome because there is hope in the future leaders of our church. In a few moments, you're going to hear some stories of God at work in their life, and I know it's going to bolster your hope in Him. And God is using these students. For those of us as we get older, the hope doesn't die out as our influence fades because there's hope in future leaders. Another place that the Israelites would have gotten hope from, they just would have drawn hope from being people who passed their hope on. Deeply rooted in their society is the idea that they always need to be passing on their hope to the next generation. They were always one generation away of dying off of, if they didn't share their stories of hope, then it wouldn't continue what God was doing in this special relationship that they had with Him. And so they were always being a people who passed their hope on. And I think of the many people in our church, the many of you who are passing your hope on to the future generations. I think of people like Ruth Warner, who is a grandma and a mom. Many of you know her, and she's passing on her hope to other generations. She serves in our student ministry, passing on her hope to middle school and high school students. She serves in our kids ministry, and she's passing on our hope to children. She passes on her hope to her kids and her grandkids. She encourages me in my ministry all the time. She's passing on her hope. And I just want to say, for those of you who are doing that, keep it up. Thank you for doing that. Others of you, you're part of the ministry of Paul Gedden. Paul's a seniors pastor at our church. And one of the things that I recently found out that he does in his ministry is he encourages people to write down their stories of hope, their stories of God intersecting their lives. And he says, don't just write them down, but write them down and then pass them on to the next generation. Share those stories with your kids and your grandkids so that when they come up against hopeless situations, that they can draw faith from your stories and the hope that you've got from God's work in your life. And so maybe that's you. Whether you're young or old, you're somebody who says, I want to write down my stories of hope so that I can remember them, so that I can pass them on to other people. And there's many, many ways that are practical and just very intentional that you can pass on your hope to people behind you. As a parent, are you on the way home from church asking your kids, hey, what did you learn at church this morning? That's a great question to ask as parents. But something else that I recently heard that I thought was great is don't only ask them what they learned, but talk about what you learned at church today too. And so they see their parents as people who are growing in their faith and learning when they go to church. And so you say, hey, what did you learn? Here's what I learned. What other opportunities do you have? Maybe some of you serve in a kids ministry or some ministry around our church, and there's a student in there with you. And you see your opportunity to work with these kids, but also don't neglect the student that is in there. Your chance to infuse your life into them, to teach them how to serve better, but also how to love Jesus better. A lot of people look at teenagers and they don't get warm fuzzies when they see a group of teenagers, right? Maybe they're in fact a little intimidated when they see teenagers. I love teenagers. And I think once you get to know them, kind of that that exterior that they have that makes you nervous, it begins to break down really quick because they're just great people. And you begin to learn that the millennials, this next generation, they're looking for people just like you to invest in them, to mentor them, to point them to Jesus Christ. You know, because family and it's degrading in our society, usually they would get, in the past, they've got those stories of hope from their parents and grandparents, but more and more, that's not happening in our society today. And so they need people who love Jesus to come alongside of them and pass their hope on to these students. Will you be a person, whether you're an official student ministry leader or not, who takes the opportunity to pass your hope on to this next generation? But ultimately, you know what? The Israelites couldn't put their hope in the fact that they were passing on their faith. They couldn't just put their hope in the future leaders because even those things would let them down at some point. The Israelites draw hope from God himself. Do you draw hope from God himself? You know, the Israelite story is a story of ups and downs, isn't it? We begin in the book of Exodus with a big time down of they're in slavery, but then we get this gigantic up of God having the Passover and rescuing them from slavery. And then as they get out into the desert, there's this down because they approach this sea and they can't get around it and Pharaoh's army is coming from behind. But then there's this gigantic up because God parts the Red Sea. And then there's this down again because they get out into the desert a little further and they run out of food and they run out of water. They don't have this stuff. But there's this amazing up because God miraculously provides the food and water that they need. And then there's this down because they're getting ready to go into the promised land and they're discouraged because of these gigantic armies that are already inhabiting the land they're supposed to go in. But then there's this amazing up because God has already defeated half of the armies that are there. As I think about the story of the Israelites, I think it's a story of your life and a story of my life too, and the ups and downs and God's faithfulness throughout that and how God wants to infuse hope into your life in the ups and downs of your life. We can find hope in God himself alone ultimately. Like we said earlier, that God is with you and that as we find our hope in him, that we can be strong and courageous and that we can complete his mission that he's given for us. Because you know what? If we don't find hope in God and continually fill ourselves up with that, eventually fear is going to overtake. That's why it's so important to be a people who know how to continue to fill ourselves with God's hope, to be in his word, to be spending time in prayer, to be investing, just like you're doing now, in church services that fill you up. I can't say I get the trend of people coming to church less and less. As a dad, I want myself to be in a place, and I want my kids to be in a place where they're constantly filled with hope because they're not getting hope from the world. They're not getting it anywhere else. And so hopefully they're getting it in my home and in a great church like ours, and hopefully they grow up to be people who learn how to feed themselves from God's word, and hopefully you do as well. And you know, the Israelites, they had a lot of hope that they could draw from everything that they'd seen God do in the book of Exodus. They could draw hope from that. And you and I, check this out, we have that hope, but we're also able to add so many stories on top of that. All the Jesus stories that they didn't have, we have those. And so we draw hope ultimately from Jesus Christ, God's Son. He's the one who left the comforts of heaven, who came to earth and lived a perfect life, that when you and I sinned and separated ourselves from God, he went to a cross and hung there so that we could be restored to relationship with God. And then he died on that cross and they buried him in a tomb, but the ultimate hope of hopes, he rose from the dead, proving that he was the real deal. That is Jesus Christ, and that's the hope that we have as followers of him. There is endless hope in Jesus Christ. So as I conclude, I just want to give you a moment. I'm going to pray in a minute, but I want to give you a moment just to talk to God. Maybe there's a situation in your life that seems a little bit hopeless that you just want to pray about. Or maybe you feel like there's somebody that needs hope, that he wants you to deliver that hope to. Just talk to God about that a little bit, and then I'll close us off in prayer in a moment. So God, we are encouraged by the future leaders of our church. We're encouraged by being a people that get to pass our hope on, but ultimately, God, I pray that we would be a people who find our hope in you, Jesus Christ. I pray for those who are feeling a little bit hopeless this morning that you would remind them of the hope that we have in you. It's not just wishful thinking. It's not just thinking a certain way and that'll change our circumstances. No, it's putting ourselves and our complete trust in the hands of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And then I pray for people who you're calling to take your hope to a hopeless world. God, give them strength, give them courage to do that and to do it very soon for your glory, God, in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, hopefully you've been able to draw hope from God and in their service, and hopefully as you hear these stories, God will continue to fill up your hope.
Recently, I've been amazed at the work of God in my school, particularly the Millard North Band. I felt called to lead a Bible study for band students, but I was unsure how many would actually come. On our first night, however, 18 people stepped into my home. Although our numbers aren't that high every week, I'm seeing God work in the lives of those who regularly attend. I'm encouraged by the way our group laughs together, invests in each other, prays for one another, and grows in desire for God's word together. Through this community, I've realized that I'm not alone. We are not alone. We're growing in faith, love, and boldness together. My name is Sarah Annis, and this is my story of hope.
Recently, God has been teaching me a lot about prayer. It's so important because it's one of the primary ways we communicate with God. I realized, though, that my prayers were often focused on me, just asking God for whatever I wanted. I'm learning that it's so much more than this. It's asking God for help and guidance, trusting Him in the process, and listening for His voice. I'm so glad I serve a God who hears my prayers and wants to communicate with me. My name is Anna Carlson, and this is my story of hope.
Recently, God has opened my eyes to some of the barriers that are keeping young people from coming to Christ. So many of them have unanswered questions, doubts, and confusion from the worldly messages that they keep getting on all sides of them. And then I got an idea. What if I could create a place that they could access anytime, from anywhere, that would give them solid biblical answers to the questions that they're asking? And so Discover the Answer was born. I created a website that answers those tough questions and brings clarity to the things that just aren't clear. And I've been amazed at how God has sustained me and guided me as I've stepped out of my comfort zone to make this website. And I'm so thrilled that God is going to continue to use it to help change people's hearts and lives. My name is Tyler Collins, and this is my story of hope.
A question I have often found myself asking is, what is God's plan for my life? I wanted to do something that would make a difference in this world and something that would honor Him. At our high school fall retreat, God called me to do something I never thought possible. He called me to build an orphanage in Africa. And my heart beats with excitement as I think about Africa and all the possibilities there. This fall, I will be attending Colorado Christian University and praying through my next steps in order to fulfill this dream. My name is Jenna Fellmeyer, and this is my story of hope.
Three years ago, I prayed a bold prayer. I asked God that He would make me an honest leader and that I would know what to say and He would give me words and that He would break my heart for what broke His. Fast forward 3 years later, and I was voted swim team captain. God has given me this opportunity to lead in love and reflect Christ and give a message of hope to my team. He gave me a burden for the outcasts and that I could unite my team in love. Despite challenges, I'm working to unite my team and give them hope. My name is Ashley Bowen, and this is my story of hope.
Growing up, I knew who Jesus was, but I saw going to church as a chore, something that I had to do. As time went on, I questioned my faith more and more. Then freshman year came around, and my mother passed away. I was never mad at God. I just bottled everything up. But even in my pain, God was working for the good. Later on, my dad, he ended up marrying my amazing stepmom. We ended up going to Christ Community College. I got Christ Community Church, and I ended up going to high school ministry. Got plugged into an amazing journey group, started doing daily devotionals, went to Winter Jam, and was baptized. Through these experiences, I was drawn closer to God, and now I'm trusting Jesus more than ever. My name is Daniel Wright, and this is my story of hope.
I will never forget my journey group leader in 7th and 8th grade. She was beautiful, authentic, open, and a great spiritual mentor in my life. Her example has helped me grow immensely and encouraged me to now lead my own journey group of 6th grade girls. I love the times when they ask me to pray for them, or the times when they put to action the things that we're learning about in groups. It's not always easy, but it is an honor to watch these girls grow in Christ, and I love leading such a fun, energetic, and beautiful group of young women. My name is Grace Hockery, and this is my story of hope.